Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais from The Yakking Show with part two of Success Secrets. Over the course of hundreds of episodes, we have asked all our successful business guests the same question, and that is, in your mind, is there one single characteristic, mindset, or habit that differentiates successful people from those that really remain average?
What you're about to hear is a compilation of 20 answers from the interviews that we've done. I think you'll be very surprised at those answers, which will likely motivate and inspire you to take action and follow through with some of the advice you'll hear. If you haven't seen part one, I would encourage you to do that. Let's get started.
I honestly, Peter, I wish I could answer it in one sentence. I would genuinely say it's taking control of your own mind. And I know it seems kind of broad, but once again, establish that relationship, know who it is that's what or who is chirping in your ear, and take control of that. And that begins with internal messages. Where do they come from? Clear those messages, rewrite your messages. And the moment you're able to take control of you, truly you, then there's nothing that's gonna stop you.
There is something I discovered that I've used with my clients and students, but it's not systemic. It's completely separate.
Okay.
Don't focus on the barriers. Focus on the goals. People who fail are focusing on the barriers. You know, they're focusing on things like, oh, I'm oppressed because of my race, or I'm oppressed because I grew up poor. That's focusing on the barriers.
The barrier.
Focus on the goals, you know, whatever your goal is, whatever your multiple goals, if you focus on that, the barriers don't bother you so much. Now, obviously, I'm not saying to ignore them. I'm saying don't focus on them.
Right.
I've helped many people with that one thing.
That's very good. Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've noticed is the ones who are successful that I've seen are the ones who know to focus. They know what their strengths are, and they know to focus on those strengths, and they outsource the rest. And they don't micromanage the people they're outsourcing to. They hire good people. They do they vet them before they hire them and make sure they know what they're doing, and then trust them to just take it and run with it. I think as entrepreneurs, and speaking as a fellow control freak, I think we all have a little control freak in us, and it can be hard to let go.
Sure.
But yeah, the ones who are really successful are the ones who know that their business is better off if they're not handling every single aspect of the business.
Yeah, I think it's what we talked a bit about. It's this growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I think your guest a few episodes ago, Jim, told exactly the same. If you block yourself from achieving success, well, of course, you cannot reach it. So fixed mindset is just this like inability which is in you, and you cannot do anything. You can't do nothing, really nothing in the end, because you will talk yourself out of every possible way to succeed. But if you have the growth mindset, then whatever happens, you feel like, okay, I will learn from that. It happens for a reason, and that enables you to keep doing. And if you keep doing, you will eventually succeed. That's what the Slight Edge is about.
All about consistency. Consistency is the number one name to this game. So, for example, Joe Rogan, love him or hate him, he has garnered the largest audience in the world. Literally more than Fox, CNN, all of those major legacy media companies, all of them combined. Joe Rogan gets more downloads on each of his episodes. And why? Sure, he's famous and he's a really good speaker and etc., but he's been doing this for a long time. And it took him, I think, almost 6 or 7 years before he really started seeing traction and getting some of these big numbers. So it takes time. You got to build that audience, and you got to be consistent, because the moment you decide I'm not going to release an episode this week, they're going to go find someone else to get that episode from.
Yep.
And then it's likely they forget about you.
Right.
Absolutely, unequivocally, yes. Successful leaders are constantly learning.
Right.
The average Fortune level CEO reads 65 books a year. In the past 5 years, that number has increased from 60.
Wow.
The average small business owner, these are business books, by the way. The average small business owner in this country reads less than 3. The average entry-level employee reads less than 1. Okay. The primary difference between success and failure is what exists between your 2 ears.
Right.
You are not feeding that with knowledge constantly. And I believe books are the single most important means of knowledge that we have. Lectures are great, podcasts are great, right? YouTube, Vimeo, however else, all great. The process of taking one of these that has been edited by a group of people, distilled and simple, made more simplistic, right? More keen. You take that and you digest that and you take those ideas and apply them. Virtually unstoppable.
I believe so, and I believe it's vision.
Vision.
You know,
Vision.
in the Bible it says, "Man without vision, people without vision perish." Right. So I think it's vision, but let's put it in terms that you as a listener can act on. The clarity with which your brand speaks includes portraying a picture that's a vision of what you see for those whose lives you'll touch.
Right.
Okay. The clarity, and this is a quote from me, the clarity with which your brand speaks shapes your impact. And so when you have a clear vision to say to people, I know this might be difficult, but this is what I see for you. Let us work with you, let the brand in other words, and this is what we see for your life, for your family, for your future. I know it might be difficult, but take our arm, we'll take you there. The more clearly a person paints that picture, and there's two kinds of clarity. There's that clarity for those whose lives they'll touch, and there's that inside the brand clarity that is the clarity of those people whose lives they know they can impact. Writing that down. That clarity is the other clarity. Those two pieces of vision, and that one I just met comes from your heart. Who do I know? I can really, but articulating that clarity and doing that clearly and consistently, that takes people to a whole nother level of success. And frankly, it's the most missing element. You go on a website, it's not there.
I would say like delegating and having a team of people to help you out, because if you're just one person shop or try and run it all, it's going to be tough trying to run your website, updating your product inventory or updating your services on your website, making sure everything's accurate, doing social media, posting on like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and Pinterest and LinkedIn, and it just goes on and on and on. And there's a lot. So trying to get others to help you out with like paid ads and things like that, where it may not be your expertise, and then they can really focus on the business, which I've learned as a business owner myself over the years, is get other people to help you out with stuff that you're not necessarily best at, because they'll help save you a lot of time and energy and headaches. Like building a website. I built my own websites because I've never found a reliable web developer. It's kind of always, for some reason, they're a little flaky, but learned doing it myself, which I wish I could find someone to do it for me, because it's kind of tricky. It's not easy, even with WordPress or Shopify and Wix and Squarespace. It's still a learning curve that you have to take to build that website.
That is a great question. I think it's having a very clear picture of your why.
Okay. Yes.
Why is it important to you to be financially independent? And for me, it was that drive to get out of that environment where overtime was the norm. And like I said, I saw people reaching burnout, and I thought, and I was in an accounting role, so quarter ends were 1 out of every 3 months, and they would kind of push you to the brink, and then you'd have 2 months of reprieve, and then you'd be right back into it. And I would look around at people and think, how are you doing this? Like for 30 years and more. I was like, I don't feel like I have this many quarter ends in me. So I started planning my exit strategy. So once I had that focus and that goal, it just felt easy to make those trade-offs between other things I could be spending my money on and what I was trying to achieve. And that's essentially what it comes down to, is trade-offs. And it's the same if your goal is to retire when you're 65. You still have a finite amount of money, and you have to pick and choose and make trade-offs, because the other thing about our world, the way it is there are so many options available for ways to spend your money. So for me, I knew what I wanted my money to do for me, and that was to, make the transition out of that corporate job that I knew I wasn't going to be happy in for 30 years. And it felt honestly easy, I want to say. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy, but it did not feel like sacrifice. It just felt like every, extra dollar that I could put towards that goal was, and that's another thing that I have found with clients, is that once they have a clearer picture of what their goals are, they start to look for ways to earn extra income, because now their money has a purpose for them. And it's not that feeling that it doesn't matter how much money I make, I'm just going to squander it. So that there's no motivation to try harder. So I think having that clear goal and that clear picture of why you are saving.
Yeah, Peter, first of all, I love this question. It really caused me just to reflect back on all the different clients that we've worked with, and those who have succeeded, those who have not, and what are those few things? What are the core things, if we can boil it down to that? And there are two words that come to mind when I think of what makes the difference between an average entrepreneur and an entrepreneur that succeeds, an entrepreneur that's great and is playing the long game. The first word I would say is curiosity. So I believe that the entrepreneurs who succeed in the long run are always curious. They're always asking questions, not just about what, the things that they directly do, but they're asking questions about the postman or postwoman who's delivering the mail. How do the routes change, or how do they change the way they deliver things? How's technology affected the way they deliver mail? Things like that. They're just so curious about the world around them. And I think that kind of, if we really think about, self-evident, because entrepreneurs often are problem solvers, right? They come up with an idea to solve a problem, to offer service to the world that solves the problem. And so it's out of that curiosity oftentimes that I think the businesses are born, if you will. The other word that I would say that comes to mind is discernment. So curiosity, the first; discernment is the second. In two specific ways, I think discernment matters a lot for entrepreneurs. Number one, in the early days, it's so important to understand the difference between advice and opinion. Because in the early days of being an entrepreneur, everyone wants to give you their opinion about what you should do, right? How much you should price your stuff for, or where you should get your materials from, or what your website should look like. And the difference between advice and opinion is this: everyone's entitled to an opinion, but as an entrepreneur, especially a new entrepreneur, you have to be selective with the people you get advice from. And advice, to me, is someone who would be qualified to give it, meaning they've either done the thing that you're getting their input on. In other words, they built a website before for their business, so you want their advice on whatever it may be, or they work directly with someone who has been through that thing, has built a website, or they've studied it deeply. So they've either done it, they've either witnessed it, or they've studied it deeply. Those are the people that are entitled, if you will, to give you advice versus opinion. And then the other part of discernment would just be this: as a business or as an entrepreneur grows, I love the phrase and the saying that good advice applied at the wrong time is bad advice. And so as our businesses grow, as our organizations grow, what worked for us when we were at a previous level of business, if we keep doing that thing today, it will be detrimental to us Or if we're still over here in an early stage of our growth and we look around and we try to take something that's working well, maybe for a Fortune 500 company, and we try to do that for ourselves here, it could strangle us. Maybe it's a big system or a big process that's just too complicated or complex for where we are. So discernment, meaning, understanding the difference between advice and opinion, and then the discernment also with knowing when is the right time to apply the right advice.
Yeah, I think there's two things there, and I don't know exactly which one I would emphasize more. One of them is curiosity and constant learning, and the other one is perseverance. And I don't know which one I would weight more, but curiosity and constant learning. I just love to learn new stuff, and sometimes I spend a lot of time learning trivial stuff, but you never know, it's just fascinating. And I think from a marketer's perspective, it's how can I learn more about my consumers? Mm-hmm. How can I learn more? How can I research more to just get that tiny little piece of information, which might actually make my day and make me the leader in the category versus not. Yep. And I think the other thing, though, that I see a lot of people, and I do a lot of mentoring of younger marketers, and I think one of the hardest things is to persevere. And I think, you do have to give up at some time, but maybe I stick to things way too long, but I think perseverance and just sticking to your guns is really, really hard. And so often you see people that, well, there's a shiny object over there, or the shiny object over there, but persevering on your way is, that's really hard to do. And I think yet that's one reason why managers and executives are very successful is the combination of in some way of those two.
Yeah.
Well, I would have to say that everyone's brain is unique. And that's part of why I've decided to specialize in the chronic disorganization aspect, because everyone has a different way of thinking. I could go into some people are left brain oriented, some people are right brain oriented, some are more logical, some are more creative. But we all have aspects of both. Those who have success in learning how to organize, I think, are willing to make a change. They're open-minded, willing to accept a different way of doing things, a willingness to look inside, see, how can I make a shift in my thinking? What are my beliefs? There's a bit of self-awareness.
And as you mentioned, change is can be so unsettling for a lot of people. So to go into their environment and even though it may be disorganized, to them it's what they've become comfortable with, and to change that could be very upsetting to them. Do you agree with that?
Yes, it can be very traumatic having someone come into your space and say, oh, you can't do it this way anymore. So there has to be a bit of a gentle approach. Coming in with a bulldozer doesn't work very well.
So much to add, but can I give you a supreme pizza? Let me give you a collage right. Fortune favors the brave. And there's a lot of naysayers and gray believers out there. And if you believe in what you're doing with honorable intentions and you're still being responsible with your family and financially, then by all means, go for it and take your chance. Do your due diligence before jumping into something. Test the waters like I did with Spanish to see if it was something that I'd want to invest in, and if it was a certain sort of environment that I was comfortable in. And I also believe in building in momentum. We all have destinies. I do not want to live someone else's life. It might seem a little selfish, but once again, I'm feeding families. I built a business. I smile every day. What's wrong with that? And so you sometimes need to walk alone. Be the dreamer, have that forced march, and hone your craft. The moment that you're compromising your ethics or you're forcing a fit, it's not right. Then maybe just take a step back and stop trying to have Kathleen and Peter pull out a credit card. Why can't we just reschedule a meeting after showing credentials? Maybe me showing you through my own expertise, ideas about a call center, who I am. And so we can make nice. understanding your protocols, your structure, and my best bit of advice, positive escalation. If you get passed around a company, before you get to speak to the decision maker, you should write everyone's name down, because if you're mentioning Eric from the mailroom and Joey from accounting, I've heard people say, how do you know these guys? I go, they're the most amazing people you have working at your company. You know, they're going to talk about me at lunch. And this is what happens prior to a contract. So I don't need to be chumming the water with the sharks. Who's competing? I'm Richard Blank, that's taking my time. Regardless of what happens at the end of these calls, my toes are still tapping because I haven't changed. And as long as you can look in the mirror and be proud of yourself that you're doing the right thing, then by all means, keep that moving forward and keep doing what you're doing. And if I never was true to myself, Kathleen and Peter, my 18-year-old self, to double down on that language, I wouldn't be here today. So it's really about following through my own personal commitment.
Well, you know, I would, you know, generally say that there are several things that when put together improves your likelihood dramatically. But if I had to pick one, my personal favorite would be adaptability.
Okay. Yes.
And, you know, the world changes whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think Darwin had a quote, you know, it's not the strong or it's the adaptable that survives.
That survive. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I would tell my story, which is I got connected to this out of some universal energy, right? So I was playing, you know, I knew I was looking for it from 8 until 15, right? So I ended up having my idea in 15 and I was thinking about it since 2008, right? So be patient, I guess, would be number one.
Yeah.
But once I was attracted to this idea, I couldn't get it out of my brain. And I thought, wow, if I apply all my life skills, I'll be able to do this better than anybody else, because not only am I good at it, but I care about it, right? So it's what I would remember. My problem is I couldn't retire early enough because I wasn't gonna have my retirement savings got wiped out. So
yeah,
you look at a guy like Vince Scully, right, who we just lost, who was a broadcaster till he was 88, and then he just died at like 92 or 94. Got to spend some really quality time with his family in the years in between, but he loved what he did so much. He, you know, that wasn't a job for him. So you have to find something like that. And there's a book. So what's cool about my story is I just did it, right? I knew I had the skills. I studied the market. I knew that the conditions of today were going to arrive. I just knew it. And so I just started going through my process. You know, I filed for the patent, you know, but then as I was getting closer to quitting my corporate job, I was still doing all that stuff, right? I filed for the patent while I was in my corporate job. And then I told my boss shortly after, and I told my boss because of the real answer I'm going to give you is as I was reading everybody's stories about success, one of these guys said, hey, I've never met anybody that's really successful, right, at the level of success I'm trying to achieve. But it's really anybody's success. I've never really met anybody that's uber successful that hasn't read this book that was published in 1937 from Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich.
Think and Grow Rich.
And so the minute I read that, I'm like, well, crap, I want to be uber successful. And I haven't read that book. I haven't even heard of it, right? I'm 50 years old. I don't even know that book exists. So I run to the bookstore, you know, immediately, find the book on the shelf because it turns out it's one of the most popular references for success in the history of the world.
Yep.
And I start reading it and it starts talking about dreaming and sleeping on ideas. And I'm like, oh, this is nonsense, right? Chapter 1. And then as I'm going through it, it starts reminding me of what I've actually been doing sort of subconsciously, right? Going through my own process. And then I get to chapter 6 and it goes, oh, by the way, if you already had your idea, you can forget everything you read in chapter 1 through chapter 6. And I'm like, oh, thank God, right? I mean, I can remember this stuff like it's yesterday. And then I keep reading it and I'm like halfway, 2/3 of the way through the book. And I'm like, oh my God, that's literally what I just did for the last 6 or 9 months.
Yeah.
So what that did for me is it created faith that the rest of that book must be legitimate. It must have value.
Right.
So what I did is I looked at all the things I didn't know yet, right, in that book about, you know, how to succeed. So what I did is I actually shaped my entire set of characteristics for the last 7 years around 31 rules of failure. So this guy studied like this guy studied like 10,000 failures during our sort of highest growth period. And he boiled it down to 31 common reasons for failure. And so as a scientist, right, me going into an experiment where I'm going to risk my life, I'm like, okay, if my theory is that if I do the opposite of each one of those 31 things, or I do what's supposed to happen to not fail, then it's a given that at some point I will succeed. And so a lot of those are kind of human character things, integrity, values. And so moral of the story is you have to have a lot of character to succeed. You have to be willing to do hard things. And so I had about a $250,000 a year job. And as soon as I got done reading that book, I called my boss, who was remote. I was the leader of my shop, and all anybody really saw was my numbers. But I knew for the last 6 months, I'd really just been spending a lot of time on this idea. And I knew at that moment that this was my life.
I would say there's probably two that come to mind. Mm-hmm. One is knowing those lifestyle values and knowing your why. Really understanding and having a grasp on that. And here's the thing, they change and grow as we change and grow. So usually my top 5 lifestyle values are all about the same. And sometimes they kind of switch around. Travel is usually my top lifestyle value, but I had a health thing pop up a couple years ago. So that took some precedence over travel. And, COVID also put travel down on lower. So I would say those who really understand their lifestyle values and their why, but then also those who are continuously curious. The world is constantly changing. And so just because you tried something before, don't be scared to try it again, but a different way now. Mm. And so being curious and always wondering, what could I be doing 10% better than what I'm doing right now? And can I let the rest go? Is a great question to be asking yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Over to you.
One thing, it's establishing an emotional connection to a desired result that you want to achieve that's stronger than the fear that gets generated in you when you begin to move in that direction. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that everybody has in common.
Yeah. Very interesting.
That's why you left South Africa, Pete.
Yep.
Because you had an emotional connection to a vision of a desired result that was greater than your fear. So you took your suitcase and you moved over to this place you knew nothing about.
Well, I'd say there's definitely more than one, but I'll give you something which doesn't just work for speaking, I believe, but just in life in general. Mm-hmm. I think you see this in high performers, is that people take action when they don't want to, when they don't feel like it.
Yep.
So a lot of the time, to be completely frank with you, I can't be bothered practicing. I really can't. I can't be bothered doing the preparation. What I like is the speaking, being there in front of the audience, but it's all the other stuff that makes that time in front of the audience, really valuable for me, enjoyable for me. If I don't do that prep, then I underperform and I don't feel good about myself. And it's the same with everything. I was recently running a 100-mile ultra marathon. I did it in June. And to do that, I had to do 5 months of training. And you don't feel like doing a 28-mile run on a Saturday every weekend. You know what I mean? But you do it anyway. And just getting into that habit of doing it when you don't feel like it is such a powerful, powerful tool which will propel you forward. And the reality is as well, when you go to speak, maybe you will feel a little bit sick. Maybe you didn't get the best night's sleep before. Maybe you had bad news before you went on stage. It sort of allows you to push through all of those problems and still perform at your best. So I think that is the key skill for me personally, Peter, doing it when you don't feel like it.
Oh, I love this question because I speak very often about purposeful success. When that comes from within. And success to me nowadays means personal fulfillment. It's no longer monetary, right? So you definitely understand that the higher, levels of, I guess, your growth that you go through doesn't mean necessarily sometimes, we negatively can connect that to levels of intelligence or whatever that means. I think everyone has an infinite potential and very unique intelligences and where they really, how they're wired. And that's really the journey of understanding yourself and growing through that. But when it comes to, really achieving the goals, I think that's maybe how we can define success. You said, a vision, a mission in place, and you have a goal in mind that you're trying to achieve, and you were with intentionality, you clarified it. It's really hunger, drive, desire, persistence, consistence, and stubbornness in many times, but also a lot of spiritual work that you need to do with your inner self so that you really understand quietly how to navigate the ship you're running, how to navigate through all the different challenges that will come aboard. And I would also say adaptability. But the top three are definitely hunger, desire, drive, persistence, and also adaptability. I would say those are the top three.
Wow, one word. She's gonna make me think of that one. There's a couple that come to my mind. I'm going to say thank you for that
give us more than one, but just
the first one that comes to my mind is perseverance and determination.
Sure.
I mean, those are common. I think probably many people say those words. But the other thing that comes to my mind is gratitude and kindness. Yeah, because I like to say I look at the world through a lens of gratitude and trying to find gratitude from wherever I'm at, whether that's at home or in the hospital, because I have found gratitude from the hospital as well. And I have to. I mean, I have a life full of challenges, but every 2 weeks I get infusion treatments, plasma-based therapy. That's from donors. I mean, I am receiving things from people because I am alive because of others' donations. So very grateful for all those that keep me alive and functioning. As my husband likes to say, it takes a whole lot of people to keep me alive. But kindness too, because the reality is that without kindness and appreciation, the world doesn't go around, right? Kindness begets kindness. And I know that's a cliche statement, but it's true. How often I challenge you to walk down the street and keep on smiling and saying hello to people, and somebody's not going to, and if somebody's going to say hello back to you. And I guarantee you're going to make it somebody's day along your way, And so for me, I'm going to say all of those are words that, of course, now I'm about to sit here reciting the 12 oaths of the Scout Law. As I'm realizing some of these words, I'm saying, courage, brave enough. But the reality is, I mean, it's common decency. It's being compassionate and being empathetic and being open to hearing another person's story and journey. All of those matter.